Collinsworth Manor was massive, and I could draw a map from it from memory. I had studied it for months. Blueprints, plate maps, and satellite photographs. Anything I could find. The goal was the Collinsworth stone, a diamond the size of my fist that the family had hoarded away for generations. I stood at the tree line on the edge of the manor, looking at the tall walls that surrounded it. I moved silently to the towering stone barrier and removed a rope from my backpack. A hook was attached to one end, and I threw it over. I pulled and it locked into place. I scaled the wall, the moss-covered rock moving past my face as I pulled myself up the rope, hand over hand. I looked over the top to ensure I was clear, and then dropped down on the other side. I knew where I was and where I needed to go. I took a moment to scan the area. The new moon cast little light on the dark ground around me. The manor itself was across the lawn in front of me. Ivy wrapped its way up the gutters, exactly where I knew them to be. I stayed low and made my way across the lawn, kneeling in front of the vines that coated the side of the building. Warm light seeped from the windows, but it did not break the dark of the night. I climbed the ivy, past the first floor and its glowing lights, and stopped in front of a large window on the second floor. I took a knife from my belt and slid it between the two shutters, flicking the latch loose with the blade. I lowered myself down and reached up, swinging the shutters open silently over my head. The window was not locked. I knew it would not be, and I pushed it open, sliding it upwards. I climbed through and squeezed myself through the gap and rolled into the dark room. I cleared my mind, visualizing the map of the manor. I was in an upper bedroom, and I knew the room with the diamond was 4 rooms away in the library. It was in a safe, but I would deal with that when I got there. I made my way down the hallway. The house was dark, but my eyes had adjusted to the night, and I could see my way clearly. The patterned rugs that lined the floor were soft under my feet, and I made no noise as I moved. I counted the doors as I walked silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I opened it and stepped into the library. I did not take time to look around. I knew I needed to move fast. The safe was behind a portrait of Dr. Robert Collinsworth, the current patriarch of the family. I had seen him on the news recently. He had paid an unbelievable amount of money for a pile of old books from the Sotheby's auction house. Old men and their hobbies. I removed the portrait, revealing the heavy, black safe inlaid into the wall. My heart raced as I imagined the stone that sat behind its steel. I breathed, calming myself. I took my backpack off and removed a set of tools. I placed them on the floor in front of the safe, preparing to crack it. The room lit up then. The old lights hanging from the ceiling had been switched on. My heart quickened and I turned around. Sitting in an old armchair was Dr. Collinsworth, with an old Luger 9mm pistol in his pale, wrinkled hand. I looked up at the old man, my eyes falling on the pistol. "Whoa, just hang on." I put my tools on the ground and raised my hands. He smiled at me and reached a frail arm to the bookshelf he sat next to, pulling one of the volumes halfway off the shelf. The floor opened below me and I fell into a dark shaft, sliding down and down. Seconds passed before I violently shot out onto moist stone. The air around me was pitch black. The smell of mold filled my nose, and I could hear water dripping. Echoes bounced around me as the drops hit the ground. I tried to get my bearings in the terrible darkness, but the impenetrable black disoriented me entirely. A series of torches lit then. First one, and then another, and then a cascade of fire fell down the hallway. It went beyond my sight, a seemingly endless corridor. Tried to grasp what I saw. The seemingly infinite tunnel of firelit stone brought a chill over me. How was this possible? What was this place? I looked down the hallway. My stomach turned in knots at the vastness, like standing on the edge of a cliff. I walked down the hallway. The torches on the wall flickered as I passed them. An endless stream of red fire. I walked on. The sound of my soft shoes hitting grey stone transformed into a terrible rhythm, the beat drumming incessantly as I moved farther into the maze. The end never came. The void in front of me grew ever distant. The staccato of my own steps tore into my ears. The beat grew more frantic as I began to run. I ran. I ran until I could hear my heart slamming against my chest. I ran until my breath came in wheezing gasps, my lungs burning as they struggled to pull oxygen from the maze's stale air. Still the tunnel continued, till the black spot of darkness beyond my vision stayed out of reach. I collapsed onto the floor. I leaned against the stone wall and disgusting moisture seeped into my clothes. I don't know how long I sat. I don't know how long I ran. I could not grasp time at all in that place. My heart began to settle and my breath returned. When my lungs felt full, I screamed. I screamed down the accursed, endless hallway, my voice echoing down the length, fading to silence somewhere beyond the blackness. I shook my head, trying to get rid myself of the delirium. My senses returned, and as I looked around once more, an intense dread filled me. My heart once again pounded in my chest, and my breath came in fitful gasps. The room I had left, the chamber I had fallen into, the one I had been running away from, was only meters behind me now. Again I screamed. This time only a wheeze came from my lips as I rubbed my hand down my face. How was this possible? I could feel a sense of defeat, a terrible feeling of resignation creeping up on me. I felt a wind behind me then. I turned and gasped as a massive door moved at an unfathomable speed toward me. It stopped instantly, inches from my face. My hair settled on my shoulders as the breeze faded. I stared at the door that now stood in front of me, my breath shallow as I tried to stay calm. It was a monstrous thing. The door stretched high, 20 feet, 30, 100 feet? I couldn't comprehend the massive wall of timber that had slammed into my reality. It was far higher than the hallway ceiling, or at least I thought that before I looked around and saw the hallway stone room now towered over me, fading beyond the reach of the flickering torchlight. My ears rang as I looked into this darkness. Had I not seen the terrible vastness of the maze before? I closed my eyes tightly, trying to rid myself of the ringing. No, surely I would have noticed. The ringing faded, and I again looked at the colossal door set into the wall in front of me. My knees felt weak as I reached out to touch it. I did not know what I expected, but it felt the same as any wood surface. The familiar feel of the grain calmed me, shielding my mind against the insanity of the maze. I took a torch from the wall at my side and inspected the door in its light. In the center there was a bull's head made from what looked like iron. A ring laid against the door, held by the iron's bull's nose. I pulled on the ring. I knew it was a doomed effort. It did not move. I released the heavy iron ring and it slammed down against the door, vibrating the hallway. I lifted it again, this time forcing it home. The vibrations reverberated even more violently than before. I repeated this, and then again, Each time the hallway shook more and more. I lost my footing, the shaking ground sending me falling to the stone floor. I rolled away from the door as I heard a deafening sound and saw it begin to open, its towering form gaping like a terrible creature's jaws, slowly swinging into the hallway before it shuddered to a stop against the wall. A smell came out of the room behind the door, a smell like something left by time to decay and fester. The stench hit my nose and I retched. I stumbled to my knees, the disgusting odour jolting me like some kind of fetid-smelling salts. I vomited on the stone floor, heaving until only bile dripped from my spasming jaws. My diaphragm contracted, my body still trying to expel whatever it could, but there was nothing. Pain shot through my body as my ribs compressed as I violently gagged. I reached down to pick up the torch I had dropped. It still burned laying on the floor, and as I wrapped my hand around the wooden handle, it extinguished suddenly, as if a wind had snuffed it out. As I looked at the dead torches that sat ensconced in the walls, they began to go out. A trail of darkness spread rapidly down the hallway, as the seemingly infinite rows of fire puffed into nothing. I squinted against the dark, but it was no use. I padded my hands against the stone wall, finding the now open door and stepping inside the stench-filled room. Still in total darkness, I moved slowly, inching my way through the unknown room. Smell still stung my senses, but already I was getting used to it. I could feel that the ground was soft now, like a shallow mud full of discarded branches. I walked on, carefully placing my feet in the mire, gradually moving across the unseen room. The sound of grinding stone coming from above stopped me in my tracks. I looked toward the sound and could see a sliver of light, like the crescent of the moon. A disc in the ceiling shifted and let in light from somewhere beyond. The crescent grew. The light shone brighter, and I looked down at my feet as the light began to reveal the room. I covered my mouth. I would have vomited again had there been anything left in my stomach. Around my feet, covering the floor of the chamber, were the decaying remains of unknown numbers of human bodies. The flesh decomposed into a vicious soup. Bones embedded in the foul muck stuck out like discarded kindling. I ran from that disgusting swamp of flesh, jumping on the elevated platform that I could now see stood in front of a wall. I laid down, composing myself from yet another brutal assault on my senses, on my sanity. I looked to the wall behind the stone slab I was laying on, and saw the skull of a bull crudely nailed into the wall, the bones bleached, the white contrasting the dark grey stone of the maze. I sat up and looked at the slab I was on, and with horror, I realized it was covered in blood, some dried from time and some still glistening crimson. It dawned on me that I was on an altar. Some hideous ritual had taken place here, or had taken place many times over. I looked around the room. There was one door on the wall and a steel grate covering a large opening in another. I squinted into the darkness behind the grate. I could swear I saw eyes staring back at me, but they soon faded, and I was no longer sure I had seen anything. Then I heard the sound, like a human scream mixed with a sound I can only describe as a chainsaw. It continued, deepening like a lion's roar. The terrifying sound grew louder, seemingly emerging from the dark behind the black iron grate. I wasted no time as I jumped down from the altar and back into the stinking sludge. I ran to the door and pulled on it, and to my surprise, it opened easily. I flung myself into the room beyond and slammed the door behind me. I looked around, and my knees weakened as I realized I had stepped into a forest. A bright full moon lit the sparse trees. I frantically spun around. The door I had closed was not there. I spun again. circling in the moonlight, my sight blurring as I tried to make sense of anything. I saw the light then, 2 warm glows in the distance. I stumbled forward, walking toward them. Gradually, I saw the form of a cabin manifest around them, the moonlight framing it against the darkness of the forest. I walked on. The mangled limbs of the leafless trees seemed to beckon to me to the shadow of the cabin. I was close now. The lights in the windows flickered. I saw smoke rising from the brick chimney, floating beyond the top of the trees and disappearing into the black night. I opened the door and stepped inside. My feet fell onto concrete, and once again my mind shuddered at the reality I was faced with. I now stood on a city street, skyscrapers surrounding me, stretching into the clouds. Newspapers floated across the black asphalt like tumbleweeds. The city was lit by streetlights, but as I looked up at them, I saw fire flickering where the bulbs should be. I walked. I didn't know what else to do but walk, to keep moving while my brain strained to fathom my surroundings. The lights flickered as I made my way down the middle of the road, moving slowly towards wherever it led. I saw nothing in front of me. The towering buildings that surrounded me funneled me forward. I saw a light blink on in a window high up in a skyscraper, the only variation in the grey, blank urban landscape. I walked toward the building. Revolving doors spun slowly at the entrance. I waited until there was an opening and walked in, letting the spinning glass guide me into the belly of the towering behemoth. The fluorescent light stung my eyes as I ambled toward a door with a sign that indicated a staircase. I opened the door and stepped into the stairwell. I felt nothing as I slowly realized I was walking up a set of stone stairs now. The spiraling steps were lined with burning torches. I didn't have the capacity to be shocked by this anymore. I resigned myself to climb these fortress stairs. I made my way higher and higher. I climbed, circling an emptiness that stretched above and below, the staircase circling endlessly. Eventually, the stairs spit me out onto a cold, tiled floor. I laid on the lifeless ground, pathetically grabbing my knees to my chin, squeezing my eyes tightly as I tried to keep my sanity. There. A voice broke the brutal silence. I opened my eyes and an old woman was standing over me. She wore a frilled apron and held a pie in her oven-mitted hands. Steam floated away from the pie's brown crust. "You just come here and have a slice of pie." She put the pastry down on the table and removed the mitts, reaching down with her hand to help me up and into a seat. The world seemed distant as I sat, like I was watching myself through a fog. I picked the fork up and went to take a bite of the pie, and when I looked down at my hand, I saw it was chained to a stone pillar. No longer was I holding the fork. No longer was I sitting at the table. I tugged at the chain that held me, screaming with effort. I heard that terrible shriek then, the sound I had heard by the blood-stained altar. I looked up, and standing before me was a nightmarish creature, a hideous corruption of humanity, flesh perversely distorted. Its feet were stretched and destroyed, broken down the center into bloody, cloven hooves. The body had hair tearing through skin, patches of blood fur that stretched in disgusting blobs from beneath translucent flesh. The head. Oh God, that grotesque head. Flesh torn from skull, teeth jagged and long, dripping with putrid saliva. 2 massive horns, of what organic abomination they were made from, I cannot imagine, burst from the top of the skull. Splinters and fragments of bone sat grotesquely embedded in the mounds of bloody flesh at the base of the terrifying horns. The scream had stopped now, and the beast, the bull thing, stood over me now, It snorted, and as it panted, I saw the iron ring that was crudely hammered through the bone, where the nose should be. Black smoke seeped from its mouth. The same dark smoke dripped from its terrible eyes. I could not look at these vile recesses long enough to describe them, but they filled me with a horror I had never known before. I braced myself as it moved closer. I pulled my arms against the chain that restrained me, and my hand was free now. I held a fork and was again in the room with the old lady, her concerned face looking down at me.
"Are you all right, hon? Here, have some ice cream."
She dropped a scoop of the half-melted ice cream onto the plate. I stood and ran to the nearest door. I opened it and pushed, but it stuck on something. I slammed it repeatedly, smashing it against whatever stopped it. It gave, and I looked down to see what had kept it from opening. I saw myself lying on the ground at the foot of the door. My skull smashed open from where I had crushed it with the door. I screamed with effort, shoving my shoulder into the door, pushing my lifeless body deeper into the room as the door opened slowly. I walked into a morgue. The body I had pushed was no longer there. 3 stainless steel tables stood in the center of the room, each with a black bag on top. I walked to the first and put my hand on the zipper. I breathed before pulling the bag open. I knew what I would find, but still. When I saw my own pale, dead face staring back at me from inside the bag, I stumbled backwards. I closed my eyes as I backed into a wall, and when I opened them, I now stood in a stone chamber. In front of me were 3 stone slabs, and over one of them stood the terrible creature, its black smoke falling on the body below its massive frame. I watched in terror as it turned its head slowly toward me. I looked away as it started to move. When I looked back again, I was in the sterile morgue looking at the steel tables. I sat down then. I sat with my head in my hands and allowed myself to cry. The tears came, softly at first, but then in wrenching sobs. What was this place? Why was I here? How long had it been? I cried as I thought about the bodies, my mind bending as I tried to make sense of anything. The room began to melt, the walls falling like melting wax. I sank into the floor and I scrambled against the liquid. I was in the center of a lake, black water stretching in all directions. I could see the faint shape of the shore lit by a full moon in the distance. I began to swim, my face in the dark water. I opened my eyes and could see nothing, only the darkness of the abyss below me. I swam, the shore still far. Something grabbed my ankle then, pulling me below the water. I saw the moon fading as I sunk deeper, my arms flailing uselessly against the dark water. I fell into a room, water pouring onto my head as my body slammed into the stone floor. The grip around my foot released, and I rolled onto my back and saw the beast standing over me. I scrambled backwards, my wet feet slipping on the floor as I tried desperately to get away. The monster reached out to me, grabbing me by the head, its massive hand squeezing tightly around my skull. The creature's jagged nails dug into my skin as it lifted me off my feet. I could hear my skull crushing slowly as I felt another hand grab my shoulder. I felt my collarbone snap under the thing's grip. I felt my skull shatter as the creature pulled me apart, my vision blinking to nothing as I felt my flesh tear and my body begin to rip in half. My vision returned, the light fading into view as I blinked my eyes. I squinted, and I could see I was in a room surrounded by books. I turned my head and saw an IV bag next to me. I followed the tube down and saw it attached to my arm. I looked around more. My eyes stopped when I saw Dr. Collinsworth standing over a desk. his back towards me. I could hear him mumbling words I could not understand. His hands moved in strange patterns over the pile of books in front of him. I rolled onto the floor and pulled the needle from my arm. Dr. Collinsworth spun around, a look of shock on his face. I saw a window and moved as fast as I could towards it. I moved in a half-run, half-crawl, and could hear Collinsworth trying to keep up, his old bones stiff as he stumbled towards me. I made it to the window and hurdled myself through it. The old frame splintered and the glass shattered as I fell into the night. I felt my legs snap against the ground. I screamed and rolled onto my back. I could see Collinsworth at the window, his pale face staring down at me. The adrenaline surged in my body as I saw him disappear back into the manor. I stood and ran for the tree line. I limped on my broken leg and could feel the bones grinding and the flesh tearing as I desperately fled from that place. I ran deeper into the woods. The pain in my leg was unbelievable, but the terror I was running from was far worse. With every step, I could feel my muscles ripping, the bones shearing the tissue like scissors. I took another step and my leg crumbled, the split bones finally tearing the limb apart, the bones smashing through each other as I collapsed in agony. I screamed in the night as I clutched my destroyed limb. Blood spurted onto the leaf-covered forest floor. I dragged myself to a tree, groaning with effort and pain as I slowly moved through the dirt. I made it to the tree and propped myself up. The pain began to fade as my blood flowed. A puddle formed around me as my vision began to fade. I gritted my teeth, forcefully blinking as I tried to stay conscious. As I sat there struggling to stay alive, I saw 3 figures emerge from the shadows of the trees in front of me. They walked toward me, and I could see that Dr. Collinsworth was in the center. 2 men in black suits walked on either side of him. Their faces were covered in tight, black masks, each with a white bull's head painted on the front. One of the men carried a chain, while the other held a massive book in his arms. The book was open, and as the 3 stopped in front of me, Dr. Collinsworth read from it. He spoke the same strange words I heard him mumbling earlier. The sound of this chant grated my already ringing ears as I struggled to live. I raised my blood-soaked hands to my face as I felt my skin begin to seep off of my skull. I tried to hold it in place as it melted over my fingers, the horrible chant continuing to pierce the still night. I felt my bones begin to shatter, shifting into disgusting formations, splitting into pieces, and rebuilding themselves beneath my now burning skin. I looked down at my legs. I could see my limbs breaking, my muscles stretching and deforming. I tried to scream, but I had no energy. The darkness was closing faster on the edges of my sight. The man with the chain came forward, and I could feel him smash an iron ring through the front of my skull, the metal sinking into the bone where my nose should have been. The last thing I saw before I finally gave in to the darkness was that man attaching a black chain to the ring that now hung from my skinless face. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to click subscribe and check out some more stories here.